So in the end, what this crisis illustrates is, the very high level of social inequalities that we have in today's societies, and also the need to change the economic system. So basically, I want to build on this, and this progressive wealth tax and tax on inheritance could be used also to finance what I call in my book inheritance for all, which will be the idea that there should be a minimum level of wealth that everybody should inherit. We claim we live in a society of equal opportunity, and we try to develop equal access to education, to health, etc. And that's partly true. I think we could do a lot more in terms of educational justice and improving our health system, but we have built, we have gone in the direction of equality over time. But I think in terms of inheritance and access to wealth, we are not at all in a situation of equal opportunity. We have lots of children who don't receive anything, and other children who receive millions or dozens of millions, and I don't think they have better ideas than the poor children or middle-class children, and so I think it's not only unfair, but it's not efficient from the point of view of using all energies. And big crises like the one we have today, in history, often lead to in effect to challenge the current dominant view and dominant ideology, and can contribute to big historical shift and change in trajectory. Human societies need stories to understand their past and to redesign their future. One example of a major pandemic in history, probably the largest pandemic of all, which was the Black Death in the 14th century, where between 30 or 40% of the population died in Western Europe, but also in other parts of the world, in Asia, in China, in India. So it was really the biggest world pandemic of all. And it's a very different setting than today, of course, but it's interesting because for a long time, many people, in particular many economists, believe that because of the shortage of labor, somehow the pandemic led in the end to more equality through the end of serfdom in particular. The general lesson is that pure economic determinant, like a shortage of labor or a surplus of land, is not enough to determine political choices. In the end, it's a matter of political mobilization, ideology, what kind of institution do we need in order to adapt to the new world, balance of power, of course, between different groups, and who is going to win. Let me illustrate this. The first thing is we need, generally speaking, we need different economic indicators to measure what we think is growth and what we think is economic progress and what we think is economic welfare. So let me start with one example. I try in my book and in my work in general to always use the notion of national income rather than GDP, gross domestic product. What's the difference? National income is equal to GDP minus capital income going abroad, and most importantly, minus consumption of fixed capital, which in principle should also include all the consumption of natural resources and natural capitals that you do in a given year. So to take an example, if I take 100 billion euro in oil reserves from the ground and I burn it, this will create 100 billion euro of GDP, but in fact, it will be €0 of national income. And it is the same, if I take 100 billion euro of fish from the ocean and I eat it, it will be 100 billion euro of GDP, but it's €0 of national income because it's only consumption of fixed capital. In addition, if when I burn this oil, I create some carbon emission, which we have demonstrated as negative impact on welfare through global warming, and if we put a reasonable price on this carbon emission, then in fact it will be negative national income rather than positive GDP. So you can see that how you define your indicator of growth can completely change the way you evaluate not only the economic performance of a country, but also the economic performance of a company. You know, basically there was a platform of action. And then the conditions for this political platform to be applied, you know, of course, had a lot to do with the major drama that happened, you know, in Europe, first with World War I, which to me is also, to some extent, the consequence of the enormous level of inequalities that we had, not only within each European society before World War I, which created a lot of tension, but also between, you know, European societies and between European colonial powers and their empire. And so the overall inequality regime before World War I was highly unstable, partly because of this international dimension of ownership and the competition, of course, between France, Britain, and Germany about who was going to own the world and get the profits out of this ownership. This led to the self-destruction of Europe during World War I and World War II. The Great Depression also completely changed the dominant view about the market system and whether the market system was able to self-regulate itself. So after all of this in 1945, there was, you know, more or less a consensus, you know, to put in place, you know, very strong regulation of financial markets, to nationalize some of the sectors, to put in place a social security system, a healthcare system, a pension. Ideological conflict, in the end, I think is the most important. You know, of course, crises, you know, social crises or military shocks or, you know, pandemics or, you know, class conflict is important, but it's not enough. You know, I really try to stress in my book that a pandemic in itself, or, you know, your class position, class conflict in itself, does not give you a theory of property, a theory of taxation, a theory of education. So you still have, you know, lots of different possible ways. You know, maybe we will have changed our view about public services, you know, the hospitals, the health system in general, and even more generally, you know, the fact that you have lots of people who do their job and who don't work for profits and who don't work for immediate monetary incentives. And, you know, this view that monetary incentives and market competition is the only way to discipline people and to organize society, this view has to come to an end. And I think, you know, maybe this 2020 episode will be remembered as a time when we shift from this ideology of, you know, competition and monetary incentives to a different ideology where, you know, different human motivations can matter, and you know, the values of solidarity, both at the very local level and at a more global European level, if we are able to build, you know, European solidarity, common debt, common taxation, you know, that would be something to remember.